financially thrive, you're either going to increase revenue or cut costs. Cloud can provide both of those. We can increase revenue by expanding, having the flexibility to grow, and being able to respond quickly. One of the things that businesses are challenged with is the dynamics of whatever industry you're in. It changes radically and fast. So Ken talked about some of the development areas. If you're a developer and you're doing application development, having to wait for deployments, having to wait for servers, having to wait for hardware, you just fell behind the curve. You don't want to do that. The other thing that you run into from a business perspective is either not using assets efficiently or not being able to capitalize on the growth of those. Let me give you an example. Henry Ford. Okay, we had an automobile industry. What did he do? He optimized the process and became very successful. It's another thing also that I want to hit from a business perspective. A lot of times people, and I'll hit this in the presentation in greater depth, but a lot of times what people will use cloud for is a DR scenario, where you'll have a company that has servers either locally or in a colo or some other location, and they need to back that up somewhere. Huge potential, huge cost savings. Mike and I use an example from the movie Forrest Gump. You guys remember Forrest Gump going out there? Okay, he went out to the sea. He had a storm, but he survived. What happened after that? He was the most successful shrimp fisherman in the area. Why? He who survives is the one that will thrive. And he who survives will be the one that thrives. So, using a cloud as a DR tool is going to allow you, your business, and those around you, be the ones that thrive when we have a scenario come up that businesses are having trouble. Let's see if I can start this. I know the pamphlet talked about 7 reasons. There's more than that. I couldn't stop. So I put 9 out here. I'll talk about these as we go on. The first one is costs. As I mentioned, there's a couple of ways that you can make businesses successful using cloud. Increase revenue, decrease costs. One of the, little history on me. I came from a couple of different backgrounds. Prior to coming to BCM, I was actually in the banking industry. I was doing security, auditing, compliance. Part of my role in that was to not just focus on that, but I would also look at asset acquisition. As we did the asset acquisition, and this is a lot of times what people will run into. You go and you say, well, we already have the server. We already have infrastructure. Why do I want to change? Well, if you look at an acquisition of a new server, the cost of that, I can tell you that that allocation of costs will decrease dramatically moving to the cloud. Let me just take an example. Typical server, let's just say that, I'm going to go back to the baking industry, because that's where I came from. We would buy a server, put an Oracle system on it. Happened to be our core banking system. And the server was probably between $20,000 and $25,000. Running Oracle, multiple processors, and so on. Now, and you guys dealt with Oracle licensing? Yeah, not a fun thing. Double that, because you always have to have redundancy. Now you're up to $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to put in addition to a core banking system. Using a cloud-type environment and using a pay-as-you-go model, there's multiple benefits. One, I don't have to worry about the initial outlay expenses. And 2, I only have to pay for what I'm consuming. Go back to my scenario of the Oracle deployment. Usually what happens when you deploy a system, you have a ramp-up time. You're not fully using it. So we would deploy out an Oracle system, we would start adding people. The server would get used like maybe 2% of its power. Well, in a cloud environment, what happens is I only have to pay for that 2% because I'm not fully using all those resources. So I'm going to save money because I don't have to pay for what I'm not using. Lower cost of system implementation, upgrades, as well as reducing the number of human interventions allowed. Talked about licensing for Oracle. Tried to point. When you look at also the complexity, depending on what operating system you put it into, a lot of human interaction, a lot of possibilities of mistakes. Allocate IT resources to an operating expenditure rather than a capital. Anybody know it? Everybody understand what that means? Operating expenditure, capital expenditure. I'm assuming everybody does. A lot of times when you hear the argument for cloud, you hear things like, well, we're going to go from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. All we're saying is that instead of having to buy, in my example, $70,000 worth of equipment tomorrow, we're going to just pay $5,000 a month and get the same resource. So basically, we're leasing it. Optimize utilization of modern hardware. If I go back, I don't know how many years, but most of your servers now, the Cisco UCS systems and so on, the CPUs, the internal guts of these things, they actually have an ability to handle multiple pathways of data, so they can compute very quickly. A lot of times when you look at a server and you look at what it's doing, let's take something down a little bit from a database level to, let's just say, a file server level. It's only using a few of those little processing threads. What the cloud's going to do is it's going to be able to optimize that and use the power of the server and break out those costs and only allocate those areas that you're using. Last bullet, though, is an important one. Don't fall into this trap. What I say by that is, a lot of times you'll hear about the power of cloud. Check the numbers. In a cloud environment, and I'm just going to give you guys, again, some more examples. Cloud providers, what they'll do is they'll say, we know that our particular server is a 4 CPU, 16 gigabyte system. The host, the server that sits on, may have 4 times those resources. But again, we're talking about systems not utilizing all the power. So, reality of it is I can put maybe twice as many servers as I normally could, given that resource, or 4 times. Make sure that when you talk to somebody, BCMs obviously takes very stringent care on this, but don't let it use cost savings from an oversubscribed system. So when they say, oh, you've got 10 servers, and yeah, all this first stuff is great, we're going to be able to optimize it, we're going to make efficiency, but we're going to put all 10 on one system. That's called oversubscription. Now, your numbers look good, but your systems aren't optimized. One of the things that BCM engineers do is we always look at the efficiency of the system, and we're not going to put you in anything that's going to oversubscribe you and create a degradation in performance. Staffing. Who's responsible for sending people to training? Anybody here a manager that sends staff to training? Yeah. So, as I said, my roles have been primarily focused on security, and one of the big security providers out there is this company called SANS, or Security Internet kind of thing. The average cost of a SANS conference, just the cost, depending on the track you take, is probably between $6,000 and $10,000. Now you've got the cost of the conference, you've got the hotel, you've got the food, you've got the travel, plus you lose staffing for at least a week. And you multiply that out times the number of staff you have to support equipment or operating systems, and it can get quite expensive. Lower cost of systems implementations, upgrades, and so on. Outside of being able to train the staff, get them up to speed, now what you have to do is have them take the time to apply that knowledge on the system. Expensive specialized training, that's kind of what I just talked about. 24/7. Going back to an example of a smaller bank, or a smaller financial institution. Say about $2 billion in assets. Probably got a staff of probably 12 IT people, maybe 10 IT people, depending on how front-facing internet focused they are. Normally, what I've seen is you've got a staff that's going to be there anywhere from 6 a.m. to maybe 6 p.m. But your problem comes in, especially if you're dealing with online banking, is that support level or system monitoring after that time frame. I'm a consumer. I work all day. When am I going to hit my banking? The electronic side of things. At night. When is the bank not staffed? At night. So, moving to the cloud allows you to address that because your resources are a location that actually has 24/7 staffing by people who go to these conferences, who get the specialized training, who can upgrade these systems, and again, none of it will impact you. Infrastructure responsiveness. Time taken to commission, implement, and configure services. Let me walk you through. Anybody here responsible for a data center of any kind? How long does it take you to deploy a new server?
Physical server? From procurement to from up and running?
Yeah.
5 weeks if you're going to get it.
5 weeks? Yeah, up to 5 weeks. So and I started this with what makes a business successful. Its ability to be agile, respond to conditions, and get in front of the curve before your competitors do. How are you going to do that with 5 week lag time? That's just to get the server in. Then you talk about putting the applications in. You talk about getting staff access. It's too long of a curve there. And once you have it in, and I've been in this scenario, I'm guilty of it. I've been in scenarios where my first spec sheet says, oh, Oracle system, 4 CPUs. Get this system there, I load on my application, we start doing online banking, guess what, 4 CPUs don't work. Resources are tapped. What do I do? Another 5 weeks. All my projects are off scale, won't work. So, what the cloud's going to do is it's going to allow me to grow that quickly without that provisioning time frame. This is actually kind of the continuation of the infrastructure. Again, it's just being flexible. It's having the ability to change the configuration either by adding additional CPUs or increasing the virtual server pool. Again, all of this stuff you can't do internally. And a lot of people like that. They call them server buggers. You know, I got to see my server, I got my server. What I did here beforehand, though, is and what I run into is a lot of times it's not so much the network side of it, it's the security side of it. Ken talked about it. My last slide's up here with that more. But the flexibility to grow is great. The cloud service can easily scale. Again, my example of the Oracle system. Again, I have a spec sheet because that's what the vendor says. Have you ever run into a situation where you have a software that says it's only going to require 32 megs of RAM? You deploy it, and all of a sudden, utilization is way off the chart. Well, obviously, they don't want to tell you it's going to take a lot. They're going to try to bring that down as much as possible. So, ability to scale is critical. Performance. There's been different studies. You know, generally people will look at it and they'll say, okay, wait a minute. I've got a host machine. I got a virtual kind of thing running inside of it. But isn't it limited to the host that it's running on? And if I take a virtual machine and I put it in a host, now I've got 4 machines running in a single physical box. Won't that slow it down? There's studies going either way. What I've noticed is that actually it does increase performance. There are certain, on a hypervisor level, which is what the server's running in, there are certain things that happens to memory. There's also certain things that happen to within the networking component. If I have 4 servers, let's just go back to my example of an Oracle server. If I have 4 servers, let's just, for now, assume I can segment them logically with security. 4 servers, I got an Oracle server, an application server, a front-end web server, and some other application server. I have 2 ways to do this. I can either do physical separation, where I have an Oracle system and a front-end application system. Now, how are they going to communicate? I'm going to have to go out the network, I'm going to go through switches, I'm going to go through routing, if it's on a different subnet because I'm isolating for security purposes and so on. Or, because it's in that same box, How fast is it? It's right there. So when you hit an argument or you're concerned about the speed of an application or the speed of virtualizing or the speed of a cloud environment, I would argue that it is much faster. Not much faster. There's some statistics out here that they've done some studies on. They go from a 2 to 6% increase. But if you even take the lowest estimate that they're giving here, which is a 2% increase, you might not notice the milliseconds. But remember that that 2% increase is justifying the maximization of those resources. So that idea of, I've got a host, I got all these little machines running inside of it, it's got to have continuous, it's got to run slower, it's not true. There's a link on here. You guys will get copies of this, I think. And you guys can follow the links and research it also. Performance killers. This is where people run into problems, either in a cloud or in a local system, and they virtualize. By the way, before I go too much further, cloud is virtualization. You all understand that. And the terms that sometimes are interchangeable. Virtualization can happen obviously locally. Cloud is obviously someone doing the work for you. So I'm going to use the example of VMware Tools because that happens to be, in my interaction with different clients, the main hypervisor, which is the operating system that runs virtualization, that we run into. VMware has a set of tools, and what it does is when you put a virtual machine in, it captures the networking, it captures the CPU, and it optimizes it. Especially when you get into Linux systems. It's not easy to deploy a VMware tool if you don't know the system very well, so people don't do it. I got an Ubuntu server running, I can access, it's all good. Problem is you haven't installed tools, which doesn't optimize the network components, which makes it slower. Second thing, the default settings on some of these servers are set to optimize power. Power management features on the hosts. So I deploy a new Cisco UCS system, whatever the system is. They generally are going to already be set by default to manage power loads. Well, in that management, it creates slowness. So anyway, you want to turn off any kind of CPU power management. Windows 2008, now let's go into the actual virtual machine. I said to balance, same reason. Again, generically, when a server is not used, you want to see it powered down. It's a virtual machine not to do that. So make sure you disable that. Direct access versus remote app management. I see a lot of times people, IT managers and staff, will go to a console. They'll bring up the interface for the VMware system, and they'll do let me log in. Let me just pull up a remote desktop or something. Problem with that is, it loads all of the drivers for that video display. It also, on a desktop, will load up anything that's sitting on that desktop to present to you. Generally, what you want to do is use remote management tools. If I'm a IT staff, I'm going to use my laptop. I'm going to load Active Directory users and computers on my laptop. I'm going to create a link over there. That way, my server is only focusing on that. Talking too much. Okay, I'll try to speed it up. Screensavers, again, by default. Servers have them. Depending on Ubuntu and Linux, you don't have to worry about. This is really a server issue on Microsoft side. Get rid of any screen service, because once that kicks in, it's kicking up power, kicking up utilization. Exclude virtual machine files from within a host scan. So if I have 4 servers, say Windows servers, and I'm running them within my host, those servers run on a series of files. The virtual server is going to have antivirus software on it. It's going to scan itself. So why use another antivirus on the host to rescan files you're already scanning? And that scanning system is actually going to slow it down. So when you look at, people going, it slows it down, it's not going to perform as well. Look at some of these key areas. And this is the areas, things like this, BCM engineers, we spend a lot of time researching this. We have a lot of exposure to a lot of different deployments. These are the things that obviously we'll bring to you. Reliability. Go back to my example of the Oracle systems. 2 systems. Great, I just spent 70 grand, I've got failover. What happens if something happens to my site? What happens if something happens to the disk array underneath that? What the cloud deployments have is they've got these pods, and there are usually several systems running in parallel onto a disk subsystem. The disks then are not only rated, which means they have redundancy, but they're replicated again. So multiple redundancies built into these, no single point of failure on the hardware, no single point of failure on the disk subsystems, and no single point of failure on the networking side of that. Try to get that in your own closet. It's a very expensive proposition. Because of that redundancy, most of the providers, yes, here, most of the providers that we work with are going to be able to offer 99.99% minimum uptimes. It's crazy. How do you give it up that much? It's because of that redundancy. It's also, if you look at doing an upgrade of a system, we can easily copy that system over, do an upgrade, and copy it back. So even on maintaining upgrades, not that big of a deal. Security. Oh my world. Okay, according to a survey from Microsoft earlier this year, actually it was last year, an average of 32% less time a week managing security. Why? Well, when I was with the bank, what did I do? Every month I had to review patches, I had to apply patches, I had to review policies, I had to make sure policies were applied. Okay? Again, cloud providers have all this down. They already have the staff doing it for you. 35% of companies claim higher levels of security. Why? How much did I say that SANS trading was? 10 grand minimum? That's just the classics. So when you start looking at budgets, when you're looking at a financial institution that's really constrained with its expenditures, maybe a year and a half, 2 years, they're going to send their staff to this. When do hackers stop? They don't. They're always writing new stuff. So if you're one staff guy, 2 staff people, are only getting training every year and a half to 2 years, I guarantee you they're going to be behind the curve. Our providers actually have a very broad depth of staff. They're focusing on this. Head into the scenario. I'm a hacker. Let's just say I want to get into somebody's financial information. Am I going to go to Fort Knox, or am I going to go to the mom and pop store down the street? That's my easy target. Now, apply that to networking. Cloud providers have full-time staff. They have complex systems, high-end security devices, high-end routers. It's going to be much harder for me to get into the infrastructure than it will be for me to attack somebody across the street. Vulnerability of data requires careful evaluation, encompasses physical, so on. Basically what we're saying here is, if I have an office building, I have servers in there. I don't control access. I have cleaning people come in. I can't control who's accessed that. Let me ask you this. How many people are encrypting data at rest if you host your own systems? Nobody? So what happens is, people say, I'm secure, I've got it, I'm going to make sure it's here because I know where it's at. Problem is that it's not encrypted, which means any janitor, anybody coming in at night can grab those disks, your data's gone. Cloud providers specializing in these areas can address that by doing full encryption at the data at rest level, data at transfer level. And finally, Ken Owens had mentioned this earlier, from a development, Amazon Cloud, big deal, big gorilla. Sorry, Ken. But how did they get started? Developers. Why? Cheap, rapid deployment. Now, that's changed. You've got companies like Cisco and QTS, I'll just throw a pluffer out there. But they've now optimized and got into that market, and they can also provide the same services of rapid deployment. I already done the business model on that. User controls. I can create a model where I can have developers go in. By the way, I did this for a bank where we had developers overseas who wanted to control their access at the user level. into servers. And through this environment, we can control access to the systems, when they can access it, how they can access it, and how long they can access it. Chargeback tracking. Almost all of the cloud providers we work with have an ability to track what systems are being used, so that if you're on a project, you can reallocate it back to the project. Again, just go back into smart business running. Development systems resets multiple recovery points. By the way, any developers in here? All right, I got a couple of developers. I love programming, but I break things. So I wouldn't say I'm the best programmer, but I break things. Now, the great thing about cloud and VMware is that I don't care. Instead of having to go through the cycle of completely rebuilding a physical machine, I can use a cloud deployment and just say, bring that back. Within a minute, I'm back to before where I broke it. Recovery time's great. I'm not spending the time, I'm not losing that money in that deployment cycle.